My name is Mingyi Bodin. I'm the second vice president of SDRW. You might ask, what do we need a second vice president for? I'm not quite sure either, but I'm supposed to assist the first vice president according to the bylaws. So here I am on behalf of our first VP, Wendy, to introduce our speaker, Trevor Loudon. Mr. Loudon is an author, filmmaker, and public speaker from New Zealand. For more than 30 years, while we were all sleeping, he was very busy researching the radical left, Marxist, and terrorist movements and their influence on the mainstream politics. I learned from Mr. Loudon the first time in my life about the young Barack Obama's communist mentors and upbringing, and that 1/5 of our Congress members work for the communists. Unfortunately, everything he predicted years ago that I did not see, I'm seeing it now in the West Coast and beyond. He is best known for his book, Enemies Within: Communists, Socialists, and Progressives in the United States Congress, which is also made into a similar themed documentary film, Enemies Within. His latest book is White House Reds: Communists, Socialists, and Security Risks Running for U.S. President 2020. If you'd like to have a copy of his book with his signature, he'll be appearing this Saturday at the Values Advocacy Council, hosted by Calvary Chapel in San Jose at 6 p.m. 8 years ago in 2012, I was invited to meet Mr. Loudon at my little town library in Massachusetts. Little did I know that 8 years later, I'm inviting Mr. Loudon to this communist-infested state of California to address the same issue, but a worse situation. Well, please join me to welcome our God-fearing, America-loving friend from New Zealand, Mr. Trevor Loudon.
Thank you very much, Mingyi. That's thanks for the introduction, and thanks to everybody for being on the call. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope so. You understand the Southern accent all right? I hope. So look, I'd like to echo the calls made by Jan for a start. California can make a huge difference in the next election. There are between 7 and 10 seats that are winnable in the Congress this time around, with some effort and application, several in Orange County, some in the Central Valley. And President Trump needs the House. He needs about 20 seats to regain the House. And that can be done from California. So that you have more opportunity in California than any other state to contribute to Trump's victory. Now, so I'm sure some of you know my good friend Malcolm McGough, who ran the Trump election campaign in 2016 in California. And you have to understand that Malcolm is an Australian, and it's painful for me to say anything nice about an Australian. But he had 350,000 volunteers. He had 10,000 on the phone banks any given evening. And about 5 weeks before the election, he was told to train those volunteers into phone banking into Florida, Michigan, North Carolina, Arizona, and Pennsylvania. And they won all of those states out of California. So look, this time your mission is very, very clear. President Trump needs a whole bunch of seats, congressional seats back in this state, and you have the ability, the numbers, and the volunteers to help do that. So please, look, double down on this. This is critical. If you can win some of those seats back in California, that's going to make all the difference in the upcoming election. Now, I'd like to talk today about China's war in America. Now, it's not so much China's war on America, it's China's war in America. And I'd like to deal with 3 facets that we're experiencing right now. Now, basically, the Communist Chinese Party has been at war with America now for 50 years, but it's really stepped up in the last few years. You know, it's what they call people's war. They are waging every kind of war on America they can, short of direct military confrontation. You know, it's selling fentanyl to your children. It's stealing your secrets from Silicon Valley. It's buying up your congressmen. It's indoctrinating people through their Confucius institutes. It's economic sabotage. It's all of the above. China is at war with America. But unfortunately, most Americans don't understand this, and they're so addicted to buying cheap toasters at Walmart that they tend to ignore a lot of the things that are going on. But I'd like to talk tonight about the three areas that China is most directly impacting the United States right now. And the first one, of course, is the biological warfare, the COVID. Now, the COVID disease came out of Wuhan in China. Now, we know that it was almost certainly genetically engineered and almost certainly deliberately released. We do know 100% that it was deliberately, deliberately spread. It was the panic around it has been deliberately fostered by the Chinese. Now, every year in Wuhan, they have a big New Year celebration in January, and this is like a Mardi Gras. It lasts for a whole week, and so this year, the local authorities in Wuhan said to the Chinese Communist Party, should we cancel the festivities this year because of the COVID? And the Chinese Communist Party said, no, they go ahead. Well, that is a gathering place for Chinese from all over the world. People come from Australia, from California, from Canada, from Britain, from Italy, from France. They all come to Wuhan for a week to party up. And it went ahead this year. And so people came into Wuhan and they left and returned to the United States or Canada or whatever, and bang, the virus was all over the world. Now, normally when you have an epidemic, the standard procedure is this: you quarantine the sick and everybody else goes about their business. This is what we did with typhoid, malaria, polio, diphtheria, you name it. Very serious diseases. But this year we were told we couldn't do that by the World Health Organization because there was evidence of asymptomatic transmission, meaning that people who didn't show symptoms were transmitting the disease, so you couldn't wait till they showed symptoms to quarantine them, and we didn't have enough testing, so you had to shut everything down. Otherwise, millions were going to die. We need to understand the World Health Organization, the Tedros of Ethiopia. And if you look at his CV, it's very interesting because he was the leader of that country's pro-Chinese Marxist-Leninist party. He loves China like a chocolate, folks. He is completely in China's pocket. So he was promoting the Chinese line. Now, what is the Chinese line? Well, the Communist Party of China issued a letter on April 2nd through their international department. This is no, we're not supposed to be seeing slides, anybody? No. We issued a letter signed by 230 world communist parties. And this letter had 4 points. This is how the communists communicate their party line all over the planet. So every communist party is supposed to be echoing these points, including the Communist Party USA, which basically runs the South Bay Labour Council. That will surprise you immensely. So the message, there were 4 points in the 4 points. The first one was, you can't blame China for the virus, because if you do, you're a racist. Second point, China is our friend. China has been leading the world and saving us from the virus. We should be so grateful to communist China. Third point, China can do this because they have a wonderful socialized healthcare system. You can't, look at the mess they're making in America because they don't have socialized healthcare. Fourth point, blame Trump, and blame Trump some more. Now, recently, Tucker Carlson had a guest on his show, Brian Dean Wright, a Democrat and a former CIA officer. And he said, I'm embarrassed, Tucker. My party, the Democrats, are following the Chinese line over COVID. They're calling for shutdowns, shutting down everything, shutting down the economy, shutting down states, shutting down restaurants, churches, all of it. Tucker said, why? Well, because some of them are useful idiots, said Brian Dean Wright, and some of them have to be paid Chinese agents. And I would put Dianne Feinstein in that category. I'd put Adam Schiff in that category, Judy Chu from Southern California, and probably in that category as well. And so what we've got is we had this massive panic generated by the Democrats and the Chinese to shut down the Western economies. And President Trump was in the position, being told by Fauci and told by the World Health Organization, if he didn't shut down the economy, there were going to be 2 million deaths. And he would be blamed for every dead grandmother between now and the election. So he shut down the economy. So you have the Democrats and the Communist Chinese working together in collusion. And the reason they're doing this is because they both hate Trump. President Trump caned the Chinese on trade. President Trump backed the anti-communist presidential candidate in Taiwan against the communist candidate, and the good lady won. And President Trump supported the Hong Kong protesters. The Chinese communist leadership was losing face. And when you lose face in China, you lose power not long after. If you, the communist Chinese know that if President Trump is re-elected, he's going to do to the Chinese Communist Party what President Reagan did to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And that'll be a lot bloodier in China. These communists will be hung by their own people from lampposts. They will be shot, and they are not going to risk that. They understand they have to destroy Trump or Trump will destroy them. So the best way to destroy Trump is to sink the US economy, which they have done. This is a Chinese operation. The second reason they're doing this, and some of the Democrats are buying into this, is because President Obama gutted the US military. He did more damage to the military than most armies could hope to do with his transgender policies, his horrible rules of engagement, defunding weapons systems, cancelling shipbuilding projects, filling the military with political generals. He gutted the military. Meanwhile, Russia and China were building up like crazy. Under Obama, America was building 9 Navy ships a year. China was building 60. So this is what was happening. And President Trump got into office knowing that America was heading for war because it was in a weakened position while the enemies were strengthened. And the only way to stave off that war, to keep peace, was to rebuild the US military very quickly, which he has been doing, and full credit to him for that. But you can only do that on the back of a strong economy. What do you do when your economy is in the tank? And already 31 Democrats, led by the pro-Chinese communist Barbara Lee from Northern California, has been to Cuba 22 times, and the ultra-radical Mark Pocan of Wisconsin have written a letter to the Armed Services Committee, which is controlled by Marxist Democrats, that calling for huge defense budget cuts in the next budget go-round. That is the big push. That's what the Green New Deal is all about. That's what Biden will do. He will destroy your military. And that will enable Russia and China to dominate this planet. This is a survival issue. The COVID panic is basically all about destroying your president and destroying the US military budget. It is a military attack on the United States. That's all it is, folks. And you got to resist this, because this is America's survival at stake. Now, just as we were starting to pull out of the chaos, just as a few states were starting to reopen, mainly the Republican states, we get hit with a whole bunch of rioting. Now, we're told this is peaceful Black Lives Matter hijacked by Antifa and other extremists. This is a complete lie. And a lot of Republicans are echoing this, to their great shame. There are two organizations behind almost all of the rioting. One is called the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, based out of Minnesota. The other one is called Liberation Road, based out of the Bay Area. They are both pro-Chinese communist parties. The leader of Freedom Road Socialist Organization vowed the day that President Trump got inaugurated in January 2020, she vowed to make this country ungovernable, to bring down Trump by making this country ungovernable. Her wife, Jess Sundin, leads the Twin Cities Coalition for Justice for Jamar, an anti-police group named after a young black kid who was shot by the police while committing crimes back in 2015. They are the group that sparked this. I've just released a new video on this. They admit they sparked it. They admit they were behind it. And they have their comrades in San Jose, in Masao Suzuki from San Jose, their comrades in Florida, their comrades in Chicago, Milwaukee, New York, Salt Lake City, Tucson, Arizona. They were the main sparkers of the riots. They were completely behind them. And Jess Sundin, I have her on tape boasting the joy she felt when Precinct 3 was burned in Minneapolis, that they approved of the violence, that the looting was an integral part of the operation. This was always intended to be violent. There's no Black Lives Matter hijacked by Antifa. This was a complete Chinese violent operation from day one. Now, the other group that's behind the protests is Liberation Road. They used to be part of Freedom Road, but they split because one side wanted to work with the Democrats and the other side didn't. So the side that wanted to work with the Democrats now calls itself Liberation Road. And they were the people that burned Ferguson, Missouri to the ground in 2014. They started Black Lives Matter. That is completely 100% their front group. Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, Patrice Cullors are all affiliates of Liberation Road, pro-Chinese communists. They have extensive ties to the Chinese consulate in San Francisco. Liberation Road basically runs San Francisco. They control the Chinese Progressive Association, which is like a big acorn that works out of Chinatown. And they are the big vote getters in San Francisco. It's very hard to get elected to anything in San Francisco without the blessing of the Chinese Progressive Association. That is run by Liberation Road and their subgroup Left Roots. The leader of the Chinese Progressive Association, a young man called Alex Tom, is basically a Chinese agent. He's the founder of Asians for Black Lives, the sister group for Black Lives Matter. He is a personal close friend and ally of Alicia Garza and Patrice Cullors of Black Lives Matter. And he is also, the Chinese Progressive Association funds Alicia Garza's projects. And they are completely in the tank for the Chinese Communist Party. This is a Chinese communist operation to burn your cities to the ground and intimidate people, intimidate Republicans, intimidate conservatives. So that's two ways that the communist Chinese are working on America right now. Now, the other way is electorally, another war that they've got going. Now, I've just spoken how Liberation Road basically runs San Francisco. I think virtually every county commissioner in San Francisco owes his job to Liberation Road. They work with the famous Rose Pak, Communist China's agent in San Francisco until she died recently. They work very closely with the people around Dianne Feinstein. And just by the way, Dianne Feinstein, she worked with the Communist Party USA back in the 1950s and 60s. She brought 7 Soviet journalists to Stanford University in 1956. That's how far back she goes with communism. Very big friend of the Communist Party. But when the Soviets faded away, she really took up with the Chinese. She got the Chinese into the World Trade Organization. She is China's best friend in the Bay Area. The only other one who rivals her right now is Willie Brown, the former mayor of San Francisco. Now, more about Willie later. So Dianne Feinstein had a Soviet spy on her staff, Russell Lowe. He was her office manager for 20 years. He wasn't her driver. He was her office manager. He was her top paid staff member, a Chinese spy. And he works very closely with a man called Eric Ma, who was a supervisor in San Francisco, a founder of a big supporter of Asians for Black Lives, a big supporter of Black Lives Matter, and the former head of the Chinese Progressive Association. This is the matrix of communist Chinese operatives working in the Bay Area to foster Black Lives Matter, control the San Francisco City Council and San Jose and other centers around the area, Oakland, of course. And this is how the Chinese are running their operation out of this state. Now, electorally, well, I've showed you a little bit about how the Chinese control San Francisco politics. Now, Virginia, right? The state of Virginia was a red state, one of the deepest, reddest states in the Union, one of the states of the old Confederacy. Now, they went for Obama in 2008, and progressively since that time, they've gone more and more blue until now all the leading officers of that state are Democrats. It's a Democrat state now. Trump's not even contesting it in this election. Now, how they did it is this. There's a group in Virginia called New Virginia Majority, and it's like an acorn, like the Chinese Progressive Association. It goes out and signs up hundreds of thousands of minority voters and gets them to the polls. And just by the way, the woman who said that we don't have to get the Republicans to the polls is delusional. You know, the Democrats do nothing but voter registration and get out the vote. That's all they do. The Republicans in California and almost all over America have not done any serious voter registration for 20 years. I know this is happening now, but it hasn't happened for 20 years. That's why you've lost. That's the only reason. Because the Democrats have done voter registration and get out the vote, and the Republicans haven't. You know, it's not good enough just to be a Republican. It doesn't matter how many Republicans you've got if they're not going to the polls and actually voting. If every Republican in the state went to the polls, every conservative in the state went to the polls, you would win the majority of elections in the state still, especially out of the main centers. So New Virginia Majority is a front for Liberation Road. It is a Chinese Communist front. And they have signed up over 200,000 minority voters in the last few years, 300,000, sorry. And they worked with Terry McAuliffe, the governor of that state, to enfranchise 200,000 Virginia felons. So they've given the vote to 200,000 felons that didn't normally have the vote. And guess which party they'll be voting for? And so that is how they flipped Virginia. Now, the way they could be so effective is they were using maps, computer-generated maps, GMS technology they call it. and they could identify who's in every precinct in the state, what their demographic is, what their ethnic background is, their voting patterns, etc. So they knew they could send Vietnamese volunteers into Vietnamese areas. They could send Iranian volunteers into Iranian areas. They knew who to target. Well, those maps are generated by a graduate of George Washington University's Geography Department, a man called Steve McClure, a Liberation Road cadre, a communist. And guess where he's been working for the last 10 years? Guess whose computers he's been using to generate these maps to flip districts in Virginia? He works in the Wuhan University Geography Department in China. Chinese material is being used to flip districts in Virginia. China helped to flip Virginia. They're doing exactly the same thing in Florida with their new Florida majority. They're behind the group there that gave 1.4 million felons the right to vote in Florida. And Trump won that state by 200,000 votes. And they're also, and Bloomberg just paid the fines of 100,000 Florida felons because they couldn't vote until they paid their fines. So Bloomberg just did that. And they're doing the same thing in North Carolina, the same thing in Kentucky, the same thing in Tennessee, which is why North Carolina now has a Democrat governor and Kentucky has a Democrat governor. And they're doing the same thing in Arizona, which is why you've got one Arizona senator, a communist, Kirsten Sinema, and very possibly a second after this upcoming election, the former astronaut Mark Kelly. So the Chinese are actively working to flip states in America, and nobody's calling them out. The Chinese run the Bay Area. They have huge influence in Sacramento. They have huge influence in Los Angeles. They basically control Seattle. They control Portland, Oregon to a large degree as well. The Canadian Intelligence Service in 2009 released a report saying that through business interests, the Chinese communists had won control of the legislatures of both British Columbia and Alberta, Canada's two richest provinces. So 10 years ago, the Chinese were controlling British Columbia and Alberta, and most people in those states have no idea. Well, what do you think the situation is in California, people? What do you think the situation? Most Americans have no clue, which is why President Trump's work to basically decouple America from China, which he will do in the second term. He will completely decouple this country from China as long overdue and absolutely essential for the survival of a free America. China will take down America if this is not done. And we may have to spend a little bit more money on toasters in Walmart, which will actually be built by American workers and last 3 times as long. We got to get Trump re-elected so he can do this, so he can do to China what President Reagan did to the Soviet Union. You imagine had Californians never elected Reagan, what a very different and ugly world we'd be living in right now. Well, now Californians, your job is to give President Trump the mandate that he needs to destroy the Communist Party of China and save a free America. That's what it comes down to. I just want to give a few words on the presidential candidates, Uncle Joe and Kamala Harris. And she is really the presidential candidate because nobody thinks Uncle Joe will last more than a few months if he does win the White House, or not even till then. So Uncle Joe is being portrayed as a moderate Democrat, right? You know, he's good. You know, he beat Bernie Sanders, the old radical, and, you know, this is fantastic. And, you know, moderate Democrats can have a moderate Democrat to vote for again. And we shouldn't be scared of Joe because he's really just a good old guy, you know, that kind of garbage. Well, I want to tell you a few things about Joe Biden. When he's actually in private audiences, he calls himself the most progressive candidate ever to stand. Progressive means progressing towards communism. That's what it means. He was Reagan's biggest enemy in the Senate in the 1970s, 80s, when Reagan was trying to stop communism in Latin America. Joe Biden was always going to the Soviet Union. It was him and John Kerry and Ted Kennedy were the three most left-wing anti-American senators. Now, Joe Biden was 29 years old when he decided to run for the US Senate in Delaware. He was a city councillor, and he ran against a 4-term Republican incumbent with an 80% approval rating. Now, you would think that was a suicide mission, but he won. And he won because of a certain organization called the Council for a Livable World. You Google this, you Google that organization, one of the most dangerous and treasonous organizations in America, and 90% of Americans have never heard of it. 98% have never heard of it. Most congressmen have never heard of it on the Republican side. Now, the Council for a Livable World was established in 1962 by a man called Leo Szilard. He was a Hungarian who became a top atomic scientist in the United States. He was a leading member of the Manhattan Project, which developed your atomic weapon during World War II. The head of security in the Manhattan Project, Leslie Graves, wanted to fire Szilard because he knew he was a Hungarian communist, but he was just too valuable to be fired. Well, in 1962, he sets up this group, and the group had a purpose. We will raise some money. We will elect far left senators in small states, because it's very cheap to elect a senator in Delaware or New Hampshire or Vermont or Rhode Island. Far more expensive to do it in California or Texas. So we'll put all our money into getting left-wing senators into these states. And the quid pro quo is this: we will elect you, we will fund you all the way, and your job is to destroy the United States military, to gut the United States military, cancel weapon systems, do everything you can to defund the military, everything you can to negotiate favorable treaties to the Soviet Union, to give the Soviet Union an advantage while gutting US nuclear and military capabilities. And Joe Biden has been an expert at that. He's done more damage to the US military than virtually anyone else you could possibly name. Now, it turns out that Leo Szilard was named in 1994 as by Pavel Sudoplatov, a former top-ranking Soviet intelligence officer, as a fully recruited Soviet agent. He was a Soviet spy. And his job was to destroy the US military, particularly your US nuclear capabilities, by electing left-wing senators and congressmen who would do that. And they have elected over 200 senators now, including Dianne Feinstein, and about 250 congressmen, including Mark Takano and many others of the California delegation. Now, the man who actually got Joe Biden the money was a man called Albert Gore Sr. You've probably heard of his son. He invented the internet and global warming. Well, Albert Gore Sr. was the president of the Council for a Livable World in 1972. He recruited Joe Biden, got him the money, $287,000, I believe, which was a lot of money in Delaware in 1972. Got a Democrat support from all over the nation, made the election a big deal, and he won. Well, Albert Gore Sr. was a protege of a man called Armand Hammer. And Armand Hammer was the leading American-based Soviet agent of the early 20th century, the head of Occidental Petroleum, the man, a friend of Lenin, the man who kept the Bolshevik Revolution alive in its early days when it was in danger of going under. Joe Biden owes his job to two leading Soviet agents. And he has worked to gut your military ever since. He has worked in the interests of Iran, China, and Moscow his entire political career. And don't believe me, because I've got in my movie, which Ming-Yi showed you before, My Enemies Within. And please get that. You can get it from my website, trevorloudon.com. It was on Amazon. That was shown. 3 million people saw it, but it's now been taken down from Amazon. Surprise, surprise. And basically, I've got a speech in there from Joe Biden. He says, the council, this was the council's 50th anniversary in 2012. The Council for a Livable World was with me when I started. You got me elected. You helped me all the way. You were there. You gave me guidance when I was chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. You helped me and Obama negotiate the START Treaty with Moscow, the treaty that was so bad that Trump had to cancel it unilaterally when he got elected. Joe Biden would be one of the biggest traitors to ever serve in the United States Senate. President Trump said recently, if Joe Biden is elected, he will sell this country to China. And he was correct. Now, President Trump, Joe Biden picked a candidate to help him sell the country to China. He picked the ideal candidate. And I was saying 3 years ago that Kamala Harris would be the candidate. And I lost a lot of steak dinners when she stood down in the electoral race. But I'm going back to claim them now because she is effectively the candidate. And if Biden wins, she will effectively be the next president. Now, Kamala Harris started out being pushed around to protest movements in her pram or perambulator or, child cot or whatever you call it. I don't know what you call it in America. In a stroller, pushed around to demonstrations by her parents, Donald Harris, who was a Marxist, an openly Marxist economist who served at Stanford University, and her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, a left-wing cancer researcher from India. Both of them were members of a group called the Afro-American Association in Oakland. That was a pro-communist group. They worshipped Mao, they worshipped Castro, they worshipped Che Guevara, and two members of that group, Huey Newton and I forgot now the guy's name, went on to found the Black Panther Party, which was a pro-Chinese communist group, openly Maoist, and basically the model for today's Black Lives Matter movement. So Kamala Harris was a radical at Howard University. She hung around with the Maoists there. She goes back to San Francisco and starts her political career. Now, she had the well-known affair with Willie Brown. He was 60, she was 30, and people talk about that. The jobs he gave her. She made $400,000 in 5 years serving on some make-work boards that Brown appointed her to. But what people do not say is that Willie Brown was a communist. He was elected with Communist Party help in the 50s, in the 60s. He hung around with Dianne Feinstein and those people. He hung around with Carlton Goodlett, the communist. Goodlett financed him. He was still sponsoring Communist Party events in 2001, 5 years after his affair with Kamala Harris. He is now as China's best friend in the Bay Area, along with Dianne Feinstein. He's enabled the Chinese to take over, the communist Chinese to take over San Francisco. And this is the man who got Kamala Harris where she is today, on the road to success. Kamala Harris was elected to Attorney General. She became the mentor to a young woman called Latifah Simon. Now, who remembers Van Jones? He was Obama's green job czar. I exposed him. Glenn Beck got him taken out of the White House. Van Jones was the leader of Storm, standing together to organize a revolutionary movement. Well, Latifah Simon was hanging around with Storm, Van Jones, and his friends. So Kamala Harris picks her up, gets her elected to the BART board in San Francisco, gets her elected to all sorts of high-ranking positions. Latifah Simon is a Maoist. She's best friends of Alicia Garza of Black Lives Matter, and Garza and Latifah Simon and Kamala Harris are a sort of set. They're a little group that works together. Kamala Harris was elected basically to the DA's position in San Francisco by a man called Steve Phillips. Steve Phillips was a young black law student in Stanford in the 80s and an active member of a pro-Chinese communist group called the League of Revolutionary Struggle, which became Liberation Road, which now runs San Francisco. Steve Phillips took a lot of his friends into the Democratic Party. He married a young woman called Susan Sandler. Susan Sandler was the daughter of Herb and Marion Sandler, the founders of Golden West Savings and Loan, the fifth biggest savings and loan in the country. They sold out to Wachovia. It was full of subprime mortgages. Wachovia went broke and had to amalgamate with Wells Fargo. But the Sandlers got $2.2 billion for that sale, and they put half of it into the progressive movement. Steve Phillips they started the Center for American Progress, ProPublica, backed countless candidates around the country, done huge damage to this country. Steve Phillips used that money to get himself into top positions in the Democratic Party. He also worked with George Soros and Norman Lear of People for the American Way to found the Democracy Alliance, which is now 200 billionaires, many of them from Silicon Valley, who are pumping untold money into the Democratic Party and left-wing initiatives, ballot initiatives, and candidates around the country. In 2008, Steve Phillips got $10 million together and did massive voter registration drives in 17 southern and southwestern states amongst Black and Latino communities. And that is what got his very good friend, Barack Obama, ahead of Hillary Clinton. Steve Phillips got his good friend, Cory Booker, into the US Senate. He almost elected the communist and his longtime protege, Stacey Abrams, to the governorship of Georgia last year, and almost elected Andrew Gillum, another protege of Steve Phillips and another Marxist, to the governorship of Florida last year. Steve Phillips got Kamala Harris elected as DA. He got her elected as Attorney General for California, and he got her elected into the US Senate. Kamala Harris's husband, Doug, whatever his name is, his company has extensive ties to Communist China. They have Communist Party of China members holding key positions in his company. Kamala Harris is a product of Communist China. She's the perfectly placed candidate to help Joe Biden destroy this country, and she will do that if she is allowed to be elected. So I've painted a pretty dark picture here, folks. You have a communist Chinese insurrection in this country, a communist Chinese biological warfare destroying your country, and the communist Chinese basically have the two leading Democrats and many others in your Senate and Congress in their pockets. We're at war with China, and if we don't win this election, China will take this country down. The good news is this: you have a president who has done more to counter China than any other president. And if he's re-elected, he will end the Communist Party of China on this planet. And what a great boon a free China would be to this world. What a fantastic asset it would be if China was working for freedom and prosperity for all, not for the glory of the Communist Party of China elite. Now, this is a couple of hundred families running China, folks. This is like a mafia operation. And we could take down the mafia in America, and we can take down the mafia in China too. You've got a great opportunity here. One thing I'll say is that President Trump has done more to revive the economy than any other president, and he will do even more when re-elected. Because when President Trump was re-elected, the checkbooks came open and you had massive investment in your economy. Well, the checkbooks are not open at the moment because people are worried that Joe Biden and his Green New Deal could be running America very shortly. But when Trump wins again, the checkbooks will come open like you have never seen before. You'll have massive investment in this country. And because Trump will get the border wall built, you won't have a huge influx of illegal labor competing with your workers. So the wages of American workers are going to go through the roof. And then after 4 years of that, after 4 years of lower taxes, less regulations, and a booming economy, what is the Democratic Party going to have to offer anybody? They'll be split and splintered and out of office for 20, 30 years. I think they will cease to be as a party. I think they will split into a couple of factions. So that's why the Democrats want to bring down Trump. This is their last shot. If they can take over the country now, they will rule you forever. They will legalize 22 million illegal immigrants straight off the cuff, like Hillary Clinton promised to do. That will give them 17 or 18 million new voters overnight, and they will never be overturned. But if President Trump wins, he can start a virtuous cycle that will make Reagan's virtuous cycle look insipid. You'll have an economic boom like you've never seen. You'll have a liberty boom like you've never seen, not just here, all over the planet, because the Chinese Communist Party will collapse, and you will see a major realignment all over the world. And the Supreme Court, folks, you're on the verge of a 6-3 majority on the Supreme Court. Trump gets re-elected, it could turn out to be 7-2. You could have a majority that will last for decades. And this will do massive things for your religious liberties. It will do things for your gun rights, your business regulation, education policy. I believe you'll be able to abolish the Department of Education so that all education returns to state level. I believe you'll be able to work on things like getting America fully out of the United Nations. I believe the possibilities of a Trump re-election are endless. So the point I'm trying to make, we've been given a God-given opportunity here to turn this country around. And if we blow this, you think back to the Old Testament, the Israelites got a second chance on more than one occasion. But if they ignored that second chance, did they get a third chance? Well, we're on our second chance in America, and we got to do everything we can to honor God and honor the founding fathers and honor the wonderful country that we are living in. Now, if we can do that, we are setting this country up for a fantastic future and a much better future globally for everybody that loves liberty. So the point is this: we're facing disaster, but we've got an opportunity to save ourselves and save this country for our children and our grandchildren. And that's going to take some sacrifice. So if you were going to write out a check to President Trump's campaign, double it. If you were going to volunteer for the phone banks, cancel that golf trip, cancel whatever you're doing, double your time commitment. If you were going to do anything you could to basically win back those seats in California and get Trump reelected, double down. Because no matter what you give, no matter the time you put in, the sacrifices you make, I guarantee you that on November 3rd, when President Trump wins the election, you will not regret one little iota of it. You'll be so proud of what you've done, and you will look what I did for you guys. Look at a better country than I inherited. So I know what we've got facing us. I know the vote fraud, I know the ballot harvesting, but I know the groundswell that's out there for President Trump. Where I live in Florida, there's not a Trump sign, there's not a Biden sign in 50 miles. Every second house has got a Trump sign. There are boats going up the waterway behind me with Trump flags, American flags, all the time. The enthusiasm is high. I know in California you don't see that so much because a lot of people are scared to show their support. But if you get out there and fly the flag, you will rally people. We have enough people to do this. As Dawn says, God is on our side. We just have to do our part. It's there for the taking. Trump gets re-elected, a 6-3 or 7-2 majority in the Supreme Court. That is the greatest gift we could leave our children, folks. That is the greatest gift we could give for America, and it's there for the taking. So I'll call it quits there. And I hope you've found something interesting in what I've said today, and I'm all up for questions if anybody has any.
Trevor, thank you so much. This is absolutely terrifying, scary, and very informative. Really appreciate you doing this. I'm going to lead off with my own first question. Could you talk a little about he who shall not be named on Fox News anymore, Soros?
Soros.
And Rothschilds and all of those people play together in this.
Well, look, there's always been a globalist cabal. Look, from the time your country was founded, you've had enemies, because how it used to work in the world was you had kings and rulers, and they would claim the divine right of kings. God talks to me, and I'm going to tell you what to do. You have to give every second son to my army. You've got to give every second daughter to my court. You've got to give a quarter of your harvest to my coffers every year. God says it, and if you don't believe that, you're disobeying God. Well, the American Republic was founded on the idea that your rights came from God, not the king, and that God could not interfere with your rights. Well, do you think this offended every dictator on the planet, every globalist, every corporate banker, everybody who hated the idea of individual sovereignty? So ever since your republic is founded, you've had globalists and communists and dictators trying to bring this republic down. Because what if this idea spreads? What if other people start wanting to do this crazy stuff? So Soros specifically, now he's certainly part of the internationalist cabal. But here's another thing I want to say that most people don't get this. Little Georgie Soros was a little Jewish boy in Hungary during World War II, and the Nazis invaded. And Soros's father got him fostered out to a Christian family, and I say Christian in inverted commas, family, to hide him from the Nazis. And the father of that family was a capo. He used to go around confiscating Jewish property for the Nazis. And little George used to tag along. He thought it was great fun. He says this publicly, one of the best times of his life. Well, then the Soviet Red Army invades Hungary, and they were hanging Nazi collaborators from the lampposts. They were sending them to Siberia and shooting them. Yet little George Soros, a Nazi collaborator, was allowed to leave Soviet-occupied Hungary, travel through Soviet-occupied Austria out to the West. How would you do that as a Nazi collaborator had you not made a deal with the Soviet authorities? The first thing this Red Army did when they went to Berlin was went to the Gestapo headquarters and found all the Gestapo agents all over Europe and America. Then they went to those people and blackmailed them into working for the Soviet Union. That's what they did. And so little George Soros goes to the West, builds a big fortune. Well, if you had the KGB feeding you financial tips, would it be hard to make a lot of money? So he worked for them. He has worked, I believe, I said, Bonnie's asking, wasn't that family Christian that adopted George? Well, they didn't adopt him. They fostered him. They looked after. Yes, it was a Christian family, but Christian in inverted commas. They were an ethnically Christian family, not Jewish, but that doesn't mean they were real Christians. There's a lot of people who are, ethnically Christian, who don't never go to church, for instance. So he comes to the West, he builds his fortune up and spends all his time trying to destroy Israel, Britain, and the United States. And Putin gets out there and says, we hate George Soros. We hate George Soros. Well, so a lot of American Christians and European Christians says, well, we hate George Soros and Putin hates George Soros. So Putin must be our friend. And they've gulled a whole lot of American Christians and a whole lot of European conservatives into supporting Russia because they hate George Soros. George Soros, in my opinion, has always been an agent of Moscow. 100% an agent of Moscow and communist China. So he's a bad guy, no matter what it is. But look, if George Soros died tomorrow, all of this would continue. He's just a cog in the machine. He is the modern day Armand Hammer, the man behind Joe Biden. That's what he is. He's just a cog in the machine. So don't think when George Soros gets arrested or goes away, this is all going to finish, because this all comes out of China and Russia, and they've got plenty of other people to pick up the slack.
Do they collude?
That's my view on George Soros.
Do these guys get together and collude?
Yeah, absolutely they do. But they don't, they will get together and collude, but they don't have to all the time, because there is a program. Like Black Lives Matter doesn't send an email to every little radical on Tuesday morning saying, this is what you got to burn this week. They have a broad program, and you know what your role is in that program. They have a broad program to bring down America. And so George Soros knows who to fund. He has people around him, like Steve Phillips, telling him where to put the money. He's just really a figurehead. I don't even think he's that bright. He's just playing a role. So yes, there is collusion, but you don't need to have, the Democracy Alliance meets 2 or 3 times a year and all over the country. And they have programs and they have guests that come in and they have a broad program, but it doesn't mean they sit down together and they slash each other's wrists and mingle the blood and say some satanic oaths. It doesn't, I'm sure that does go on at certain levels, but mostly it's just a program and people know where to fit in, and the funding directs you. Funding tells you where to go, basically. Excuse me. Anybody else have a question or comment
Trevor?
or pushback
No,
or
Honda.
disagreement?
No.
Hi, Mel.
Trevor, George Soros destabilizes countries and makes his money on money exchanges. So his greed is very clear. But why are people like Bloomberg and Tom Steyer, who are multi-billionaires, engaged in this game? It doesn't make sense. I understand Trump embarrassed them both, so there's some get-even factor, but it's way beyond that. What's your thoughts?
Well, Tom Steyer in particular is a leftist. He was involved with communist groups at Stanford University, and the same groups that Steve Phillips used to work around with the Maoists. That's who he was hanging on the edge of that. So he's got this sympathy for leftism. He had more Marxists in his campaign than anybody except for Bernie Sanders. So he has got a Marxist bent. But see, this is, to me, the big guys, the Bloombergs, the Steyers, the Zuckerbergs, their model is communist China. Their ideal world, their ideal globalist world is communist China, because communist China is a totalitarian state, but it still allows private business. You still can be a rich capitalist in the communist Chinese state. So they have the best of both worlds. They can make all the money they want. They have a captive audience. They have no competition, because there is there's not much small business. And if that small business starts to threaten them, they can easily get it suppressed. So this globalist model of a world superstate really, I think, will be modeled on communist China, where big business and the communist state really work hand in glove, and they can just dominate everybody. There'll be 2 classes: the Communist Party elite, the globalist business elite, then everybody else will be expendable peasants. So, the big business, we all think all big businessmen are supporters of the American free enterprise system because that's what made them rich. Well, there's always been an element in big business that loves cartels, that loves to suppress competition, that loves big government, because big government helps them to keep their competition at bay. So not everybody in big business really loves the American free market system, where businesses go up and down, where there's always competition, where you stand on your own merits. There's always been this corporatist, they used to call it mercantilism years ago, corporatist, socialist, fascist type element, under Mussolini, who was a socialist. It was big labor, big business, big government. That was the 3 things. Well, that is the model for the New World Order, that communist fascist state. I think the communists will actually destroy these big capitalists, but they don't, obviously the big capitalists don't believe that. But either way, whatever they do to each other, they've already done it to us. You know, we've got to, the big battle in the world now is not between Democrats, Republicans. It is between those who believe in constitutional government where power is diffused and the individual is supreme, and those who believe in the collective, those who believe in the big super state and big business. My view is I'd love to see a small America, America with a small government, business freed from government control, business not working with government, maximum state independence, maximum local independence, and a world where the French run France and the Belgians run Belgium and the South Africans run South Africa and the Chinese run China and the Colombians run Colombia and the Mexicans run Mexico, a state where power is devolved. And the battle is against those who believe in globalism, a big corporate state, and the idea that the people are nothing. The people are just peasants to be used as an expendable resource. So when you get to a certain level in business, you start to get drawn into the globalist circles. You start to be invited to the big conferences, to the Bilderbergers, to Davos. You start to become part of the power elite, and you believe your role is to guide the world, because those dumb peasants are just too stupid to do it themselves. And the world should be so grateful that you are there to tell them how many kids to have, and tell them how to run their businesses, and tell them and shut down, you know, and make sure that global warming doesn't get out of control and all these kind of things. So the contest is really between the individual and the nation state and the constitution and the world superstate. That's what the big battle is. And Trump's on the side of the individual and the Democrats are on the side of the globalists. That's how I see it.
Gary.
Trevor, another one. He clearly wants to be the next Mao and a lifetime emperor.
Yeah.
But there's a largely expanding middle class in China that's doing very, very well, and that's why the Chinese are very happy. But here in the United States, the middle class is disappearing. Could you address what that's all about?
Well, look, you know, China had to build up its economy. If China was going to challenge America, it had to build up its economy and its strength so it could build a good military and become an industrial powerhouse. In 1975, China couldn't threaten the Philippines. China couldn't have threatened anybody. But you had the globalist Henry Kissinger sold Nixon on the idea that we can play China off against Russia. If we build up China, they will become democratic like us. They'll become part of our world. Well, in the meantime, so the whole goal for the last 30 years has been to build up China as a force and destroy America as a force. So the American middle class had to be destroyed. It had to be destroyed through regulation, through corporatism, through the education system, through taxes, through every way you could to destroy the American middle class. What they want in America is a rich elite and basically a world full of peasants. Basically what is happening to California right now, where the middle class has been driven out of the state. And so it's like the Soviet Union, right? The Soviet Union banned homosexuality in their country because they saw it as a corrosive force that would cause division and weaken their state. Meanwhile, they promoted it in America through communists like Harry Hay. You know, the Russians had a fantastic education system, very rigorous, very disciplined, very science orientated. Meanwhile, the same communists were promoting a degradation of the American education system. They were promoting liberal education. They were de-emphasizing science. They were indoctrinating kids. So the whole goal is to build China up as a force. So you need that middle class, you need that business class, while destroying the middle class in America, destroying the industrial base in America. And that would mean eventually China would be the dominant force in the world and America would become a second or third rate power. The other factor is, if you look at basic Marxism, people said when China went back to capitalism, that showed that they didn't believe in communism anymore. They could be our friend. They were leaning our way. Well, no, that's not the case. Look, there are 5 stages in Marxism. There's primitive communism, where you live in a cave and you go out and kill a mammoth and everybody shares the meat. You know, that's primitive communism. Then you had feudalism and agriculture and feudalism, where you had peasant farmers and you had warlords who would control various areas, you know, protect the peasants from the other warlords. Then you had the Industrial Revolution, the birth of capitalism, the birth of a finance industry and factories and all this kind of thing. Then you go into socialism, where the government distributes the wealth produced by capitalism. And then you go into this classless communism. That's the 5 stages. Well, the Chinese Communist Party openly says, as does the Vietnamese Communist Party, we made a big mistake. We tried to go from feudalism straight to socialism. Big disaster. We got to go back through the capitalist stage before we can go to socialism. So that's where they went back. And we all thought, oh yeah, wow, that's great. They're building factories, they're building businesses. They've abandoned this crazy communist idea. You know, our policy of engaging with China is winning. Wow. Now China's got a huge military. Now China's got a huge economy, and they're going back on the socialist road under Xi Jinping, as could be completely predicted if you just understood basic Marxism. And so we've got a situation, they're going back now towards a militaristic, whole of government approach. Their goal is now to destroy America. That's their goal. And they will work with their Russian friends to do it. So we're in a very perilous situation right now. But China has huge problems. You know, they're by aborting 30 million baby girls, now they've got 30 million young men who will never marry, which is a big social problem. They've got huge food problems looming. You know, if their Three Gorges Dam collapses, you can imagine what that's going to do to China. So they've got a bit of a window of opportunity. They've got to strike at America fairly soon, because if they don't, they could go into a collapse of their own. So we're in a very perilous point right now. The Chinese Communist Party realizes they're on the brink of a collapse. And so they really have to take down America, because it's really a contest who's going to win, America or the Communist Party of China. Because the Chinese have these huge divisions. They have these ethnic problems, and they're just holding it together. You know, while the economy's doing good, they can sort of hold it together. But if their economy collapses, they have major food problems. For instance, the Three Gorges Dam collapses, or anything, or there's a rebellion of the Uyghurs or whatever, they could have chaos. And they will, you know, you cannot imagine how that might spin out of control. So we've got to realize the Chinese are not this invincible monolith. The Chinese Communist Party is hanging on by its fingernails. You know, this could spin out of control very easily for them. And that's what I think President Trump wants to do. Not because he hates China, he just wants to get rid of the Communist Party of China so the Chinese people can live in a free country and enjoy the same freedoms that everybody else does around the world. And I think that would be a huge boon for all of us, you know, for everybody. So yeah, we've got to understand that. See, this is what we're at right now, right? We're in Vietnam in 1968. The American forces had virtually defeated the communists, virtually defeated them, but they mounted this huge Tet offensive. They sent wave after waves of communist troops to attack every military base in South Vietnam. But they were slaughtered. It was a huge military defeat for the communists. They were slaughtered in their thousands. but it was a massive psychological victory for the communists in America, because it turned American public support away from the Vietnam War. People were thinking, why am I going to send my son to fight? The communist Chinese, if you play poker, the communist Vietnamese had a pair of twos. America had 3 aces, and they bluffed us out with a pair of twos. We folded. They bluffed us. Well, right now, the Communist Party of China has a pair of twos. The left in America has a pair of twos. We have 3 aces, and they're throwing everything at us they can in a massive Tet offensive. They're doing this massive offensive to try and bluff us out. Well, we got to call that bluff, because they got a pair of twos and we got 3 aces, and they want us to fold just like we did in Vietnam. We have the upper hand in many ways. We just got to call their bluff, and they will fold and they will collapse. That's how I see it.
Wow.
Very interesting. Jan?
Well, Trevor, obviously, we could listen to you forever and forever. But we know that your time is valuable, and we so appreciate you being here.